I'm Jennifer and welcome to my library. I'm a chaotic neutral mechanical engineer who's really into permaculture and wants to talk about books. So let's talk about books. So these books are out of here. This is probably the biggest unhaul I've done. And it's because I went through the books that I read this year, and I also went through all of my books because I was reorganizing my bookshelves. And I just cut out the things that weren't bringing me that happiness in my life. I'm just gonna go through them in absolutely no order out of convenience for myself. I have very little surfaces with which to put these down on, and I'm just gonna grab what's on top and talk to you about them. This I would have covered in my end of the year wrap up, and so if you watched that, you probably already heard me talk about Second Stage Lensman, which I don't think this will come as a surprise because basically this is a book in the middle of a series, a really long series about these lensmen. And while I had like kind of a goofy fun time with this book because of its like, it's so sexist and then it thinks it isn't because it's like, and a woman can be a lensman, wow. So anyway, it's got that really peak entertaining sexism for me, but overall the plot kind of fell off. I'm not going to read this again, and I'm sure somebody else will also have a good time with this. I do feel a little bit sad getting rid of this copy just because it's like a cool looking book. It's an old book and I like collecting older science fiction, but with something that I don't really have interest in really at all, I don't need to have it. The next book that I'm getting rid of, I actually didn't think I would be getting rid of, and just on an impulse, just before this video, I decided I would grab it and get rid of it because I didn't like this book. That's Mr. Mo's Traveling Couch. I also read this year. I don't know what the hell happened in this book. I didn't enjoy it. The reason I would keep books around is if I'm going to recommend them to people in the future, if I'm going to read them again, if I want to be able to hold them up because I'm going to be talking about them. I'm not going to be talking about this book. I don't know what context I would like suddenly start talking about this book again. So this I'm getting rid of. I don't know if I've ever read a book and then like right away just was like, I don't want to have this anymore. That wasn't like an offensive, like outright I hated it kind of book. I didn't hate this book, it's Brooklyn. It's Brooklyn. I just felt I felt very little. I felt so little. And I think the cover is beautiful. It's that movie cover. It's a very well composed cover. The book is nice and small and cute, but I don't ever want to read this again. I did not care for this book. This didn't give me feelings. This didn't do very much for me at all. So this is going away. The next two are buddied up together because they are Shadow of the Hegemon and Shadow Puppets. I read Ender's Game. Really enjoyed Ender's Game. I probably wouldn't have continued that much with that series if the next books weren't so interesting to me. Like Children of the Mind, Xenocide, those I think are so cool because of their exploration of other forms of life and different ways of creatures living. I just find that so interesting. These books are not that at all. This is what's happening back on Earth with Bean and Ender's brother and sister. And basically, it's a bunch of politics stuff. So I read Ender's Shadow. I don't own it, but I read it a few years ago. And then I had purchased Shadow Puppets because I had gone to a bookstore back when I was in college and I thought Shadow Puppets was the next book in the series, and it wasn't. That was Shadow of the Hegemon. So then I think I found this at a thrift store or something, picked up this copy, and then I could finally read both of them. And they're just not for me. this type of story is not the story for me. Having these like super full of themselves, like, oh my god, I'm so intelligent. Oh my god, nobody understands me. We're just the bestest, smartest little kids in the world. And I hate that. And I also hate I just hated the politics. This is not for me. I've thought about, like, maybe I would reread some of these stories at some point, but at this point, I don't need that. I just don't need it. That's The Merry Spinster, and these are short stories based on fairy tales. That genre for me, short stories based on fairy tales, has just been overdone. This isn't a terrible collection. Some of the stories I didn't enjoy, but I just don't need it for me. So I'm gonna get rid of it. I'm gonna give it on to somebody else, and I think somebody will pick this up and enjoy it. I read this last year, Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe, and while I was reading it, it was okay. I was expecting something else. I was expecting something better, and then there was just some parts of it that I really hated. And then after I read it, I was like, oh, that might be a 4-star. And then after that, I was like, no, this is a 3-star. And then my enjoyment of this book has lessened and lessened and lessened as time goes on, which usually the opposite happens, that a book becomes more and more prevalent in my mind. This one has become less and less prevalent in my mind. And it's such a popular book that I think people will pick it up if I donate it to my little free library. Now we have a book that I had a fine time reading. It was such a popular book. It's just not a genre that really interests me, and I'm not gonna reread it, and I don't need to have this anymore. That's Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. If you know me, I think you'll know why I don't need this. It doesn't really encompass anything that I really care about in a book, and I don't need it on my shelf. This book I had an okay time with as well. I didn't dislike my reading experience, but it's just not for me. It's okay, it's fine, but I don't need to have this anymore. That's What You Don't Know About Charlie Outlaw by Leah Stewart. And yeah, again, I thought this was totally fine. I'm not getting rid of it because I didn't like it. I'm just getting rid of it because I'm not going to reread it. I'm not going to recommend it all the time. This is one of the coolest looking books that I have. I think it's such a beautiful design for a book. That's I Am Death by Gary Amdahl. And I read this maybe a couple years ago, maybe 2020, 2021. It's 2 novellas. They were somewhat interesting, but not exactly my style. I'm not going to reread them, and the main reason why I was holding on to this book is because I think the book design is so beautiful. Like, it's such a cool looking book, but I would like to give this book a chance in somebody else's household, because again, I'm not going to reread this. I'm not really going to recommend it. I don't want to have this book in my house anymore. It's a really beautiful cover, but every time I see it, it makes me remember how much I didn't enjoy the content of this book at all. That's My Absolute Darling by Gabriel Talent. I read this whole book, and I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it at all. I really, really don't like reading about somewhat realistic abuse of little children. That's the main reason. I don't want to have this in my home anymore. I feel like it was probably written well, but this is just not for me at all because of triggering content, to be perfectly honest. This last book is also a really beautiful book, and I am sad to let it go. It has these really stunning illustrations, and the cover is textured. I love the cover design so much, but the content inside, in terms of the writing, the illustrations inside are also really cool, but the stories inside I was so underwhelmed by. Here's an example of the illustrations. Cool stuff. This is also a fairy tale retelling short story collection, and like I mentioned, I don't need that. I don't really want that. And I did not like the way that this book was written strongly. That's it. That's my unhaul. That's why. Obviously, I'm not going to get rid of books that I love. So if you have read and you do really like these books, nothing I said has anything to do with you or your taste. This all has to do with me and what I don't want to have in my house anymore. Some of it is books that I think other people will enjoy more than me, and so I'm happy to put them back out into the world. Some of them are things that I just really don't want to have around anymore, and that's for my own personal reasons. Let me know. Do you unhaul books at like a specific time of the year? I feel like getting rid of books right at the beginning or end of the year makes a lot of sense to me. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider sharing it with a friend who you think would also enjoy it. Consider liking and subscribing, and I will be back again soon.